Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers from ARM for the invitation to present today. We've been fortunate to be part of the ARM organization for more than a decade. I think we go back 12 or 13 years now, so we're very pleased to be here today. I'd like to focus this morning's conversation on CTI, a 25-year-old global clinical research organization with a specialty around cell and gene therapy. Our focus is obviously both the patients and the sponsors. And I think from a standpoint of the vision and who we are, I think that'll be clear in the coming slides. We have grown to be one of the 20 largest providers in the world with associates in more than 60 countries. And as such, we have the largest footprint of all mid-sized clinical research organizations. Center of the slide focuses on the service offerings, and you can see we have a full suite of service offerings with a particular emphasis on emerging companies. We like to focus on companies that we feel like are underserved many times by the largest firms around the globe. We're particularly proud of the fact that we work on behalf of more than 250 pharma, biotech, medical device organizations, and we have been part of more than 212 approvals since the company's inception, representing about 15% of all approvals by FDA, EMA, et cetera, during that time period. In a few moments, I'll focus specifically on the CG&T approvals. The key to an organization like ourselves are the team members, and we pride ourselves on industry-leading retention. One of the criticisms that we frequently hear is high turnover. I hire a partner, I have a team that's assigned to me, and very quickly they're no longer present. In our situation, 90+% annual retention going back more than 2 decades. So when someone starts on a project, there's a very, very high likelihood that they'll finish it. Our global presence, as mentioned, with associates in more than 60 countries, we specifically right now have team members working on cell and gene therapy trials in more than 30 countries around the globe. So as such, every region is covered, and we're able to either do a first-in-man trial or expand to pivotal registration studies, especially in the situation of rare patient populations where you have to go to some areas that may not be covered by many of the pharma providers. It's an extensive leadership team, and it's one that we've been very blessed to have at CTI, one that both has a North American focus as well as a global focus when you look at both the titles and locations of some of these individuals. I wanted to specifically highlight Dr. Monica Shaw, who's here at this meeting. Monica is a long-term expert in the cell and gene therapy world and has worked on both the sponsor side as well as the pharma service side before joining CTI, and her particular expertise as a member of the organization and having many specific traits that are important, whether it be leading our medical affairs team or having oversight of our safety or our regulatory scientific affairs that guides many of the regulatory processes that CTI engages in. This slide probably is familiar to many of you. It has the evolution of the products approved across the cell and gene therapy arena from inception. And I'm really happy to highlight that the ones in the box actually represents ones where CTI has worked with the particular sponsors in managing the research, guiding the regulatory approvals, and ultimately being part of the dossiers. We represent more than 60% of all the approved FDA and EMA cell and gene therapy approvals. In this particular slide just gives you an example of recent approvals and particularly highlights last year more than a dozen approvals that the company supported. When we work with a sponsor, even in an early engagement, we think about the first patient, the first set of data, and how ultimately that is going to support a dossier. We're very happy and proud to say that we have never had a BLA or NDA rejected for quality reasons, and that is something obviously to be taken quite seriously. We wanted to highlight one particular partnership for you. This represents actually close to 15 years now with one particular U.S. biopharma company where we have been part of 3 gene therapy approvals. It represents a lentiviral platform where the studies took place across 30 different research sites on continents including North America, Europe, as well as the Asia-Pacific region. It involved both adult and pediatric patients, and like I said, led to 3 different approvals across regulatory bodies globally. We continue to follow many of these patients in the realm of sickle cell, beta thal, and adrenoleukodystrophy now in long-term follow-up studies as well. This particular busy slide, I want to just highlight the lower right-hand quadrant, if I could, is one of the things we've seen the evolution from our early work in the CAR-T world more than 10 years ago to some of the work today, where the direct administration of products rather than intravenous administration, which was the most common route of administration, has now pivoted. And as you can see on this slide, we are administering products in just about every possible route in an attempt to get the particular advanced therapy directly to the site that's desired. And as such, that creates a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. And we're really, really excited about some of the efficacy studies that we're seeing in things like solid tumors, where some of the early generations did not necessarily show efficacy. We are now seeing that. And I will say, having a team that's very experienced around the logistics, having a team that's very experienced relative to supporting the research sites in some of these challenging endeavors is particularly important. Give you just a sense, as mentioned, we have more than 125 active cell and gene therapy trials that we're currently supporting around the globe. If you look at this, and we'll focus on the middle of the slide just to start with, is about half of these programs involve cell therapies and about half involve gene therapies. And if you look at the data that ARM publishes each year, that's always quite comprehensive, we mimic, I think, their research quite closely. Also, a little less than half represent autologous programs and a little over half allogeneic, although we're continuing to see that pivot increase in the difference in those two continuing to grow. I do want to focus on the left-hand side part of the slide for just a moment, is we're seeing an increasingly high percentage of registration cell and gene therapy trials. And I think that obviously bodes very, very well for the patients, for the caregivers, as well as for the advanced therapy community with more and more of the studies. Our own experience right now is almost a quarter of all studies are phase 3 registration studies, and there also is a number of combined phase 2, phase 3 trials that also will be used potentially for support of an approval. There are a number of challenges relative to research around cell and gene therapy. I don't have to tell the group in the room this, but I just wanted to focus on a couple of topics here. One of the things is a regulatory complexity. There's no question advanced therapies are more complex than small molecules, for instance. Our approach to this is early and often engagement with the regulatory authorities and a very tailored, focused strategy. From a standpoint of patient recruitment, I probably was in a dozen or more meetings with sponsors yesterday, and I would say startup timelines and patient recruitment and cost are the three things that were most brought up. One of the things from a recruitment standpoint is more utilization of advocacy partnerships and more data-driven approaches as far as where to do the research. Site activation is mentioned, a real challenge for everyone, and I think the idea of parallel contracting, utilizing existing contracts, IRB or ethic committee forums, things like that can be particularly beneficial. Certainly on the manufacturing side, having a very robust CMC and logistics support is particularly important. And then finally, the use of real-world data and digital health to support these trials and ultimate approvals is becoming increasingly more common. I want to give a particular shout out to a unique group we have within CTI, which is our model-informed drug development. I think, as we all know, when you do any non-clinical or preclinical work with advanced therapies, the predictability of those as to the doses that should be used in the first human trials is very poor at best. What we have found with a model-informed drug development approach, we have been able to identify the appropriate doses to use in phase 1 more quickly. We've also found we've been able to have smaller cohorts, and we've seen great acceptance by the regulatory bodies, including FDA and EMA. In fact, there are some position papers that are out there encouraging sponsors to consider this approach. So it's a very, very unique set of service offerings for CTI, and one that has a lot of experience, not just in cell and gene therapy, but also in antibodies, antibody-drug conjugates, basically large molecules, which are very hard to predict the appropriate dose. Want to comment specifically on some comments about innovation, and I think this is something where the issue of having more than 100 active studies, we're able to learn from each study and then take that to the next study. And I think the issue of regulatory interactions, as mentioned before, and really especially in the rare or ultra-rare patient populations, being able to have trial designs that accelerate approvals, in some cases, for instance, conditional approvals, in other cases, ones where we're using natural history or registry studies to support the approvals. The digital transformation, as mentioned, the issue of using real-world evidence and remote data monitoring, trying to reduce the burden on the sites. The issue of making sure studies are patient-centric. We had the chance yesterday to have some patients and patient support groups presenting in this conference, and I think it's always front and center for us to make sure when we're designing a clinical development plan or a specific trial to make sure that there is patient input, and especially relative to things like quality of life and economic metrics. And finally, I think the issue of business impact. One of the things, and when we think of things like a product like Yescarta, which is now more than $1 billion annual revenue product, when you think of it, every week or every month lost during the research time is one that's also lost at the end when the patent expires. And as such, the issue of trying to do things as quickly as possible, the lowest cost, and ideally expanding the global opportunity for the sponsor is first and foremost for us. Particular focus on our regulatory consulting team, and this is one where from the very beginning, the Interact meetings, the pre-IND, really trying to define the strategy and making sure there's an alignment between the regulatory authorities, the sponsor, and ultimately even the key opinion leaders as to what goes on. You can see the team has a full suite of service offerings all the way through to the BLA in this case, and you can see all the steps along the way that we're able to support, whether it be with the regulatory team, the medical writing team, the medical affairs team, all brought to bear in order to ultimately support both getting into the clinic as quickly as possible and then finally being able to get that approval. Do want to highlight at the lower part of the slide things like the PRIME designation, fast track, orphan, et cetera. Particularly important, I think, from the standpoint of the investment community and being able to put an assurity on the validity of the approach that the pharma or biotech company is taking. This slide has some similarities to the last one, but I wanted to particularly focus on the issue of the BLA. For us, typically for us, at any given time, we have multiple BLAs going in the cell and gene therapy area. Sometimes they are the initial application. Other times we're expanding the application to second or tertiary geographies beyond the first submission or approval. So again, particularly important to have a global approach to your regulatory submissions. A couple of last things I wanted to focus on before leaving you. One is the issue of rapid site activation. I think this is something where there's a pain point specifically for pharma and biotech from the standpoint of the cost and the delay to the programs. Particularly important to, I think, have a partner that has their finger on the pulse relative to this. And from our perspective, this is an example of a real-life example that happened very recently where we were able to have a cell therapy trial and have a site activated in less than 4 months. This is very challenging, but it's not something that's uncommon. So if you're thinking of a program and somebody's telling you expect 8, 10, 12 months before your first site can be activated and your first patient screened, we would love to have a chance to talk to you. This happened to be a U.S. example, but we have some similar examples in other parts of the world as well. Finally, thinking about differentiation, I only want to point to a couple of things on this particular slide, but I think the thing that strikes me is the issue of having an experienced partner. You end up having a protocol that's enrollable, you have endpoints that ultimately are approvable, and you ultimately are in a position where along the way you have much more predictability, whether it be timelines, whether it be cost, whether it be ultimately the data. We're not able to assess whether or not a particular therapy is efficacious or what the safety profile is, but I think we can have great confidence relative to how the design will be able to demonstrate, in fact, the safety and efficacy protocol. I'm going to end there and actually give you an extra minute or so back, which I know is a bit unusual in this meeting where everybody tends to run over. But thank you very much again to ARM for the opportunity to present and for each of you being here today.